Hello, this is Duncan with Photography Lessons Part 2, Advanced Photography Techniques. So here we have a picture that I took off of Cape Cod a couple of years ago. I really like this picture, nice cotton candy sunset here. I'll have some other pictures of mine throughout the presentation, and both to talk about what I'm discussing and also just to show off some of the pictures that I've taken and what you can do with cameras nowadays. So we're going to start off talking about iPhone camera interface. This was discussed in the last meeting, and I wanted to go over it in more detail now with some screenshots. This photo is taken off of island called Chebeague Island off the coast of Maine at sunrise, which is really beautiful. I woke up to this view. So with the interface, starting off with all the different buttons, at least with the iPhone, with other phones, it's often the same, or with older operating systems, things usually look just about the same or maybe change a little bit, but this will be as what shows on my phone, which is a relatively simple iPhone. So for starters, you've got a shutter button at the bottom. You can also use the volume buttons on the side in order to do the shutter as well, if you would like. Then you've got the reverse camera button that allows you to do things like selfies, and if you're doing FaceTime, you can do reverse camera to do FaceTime that way as well. Then you've got the photo library, so you can select that to go view the photos that you've taken in your library if you need to make sure that photos that you've taken look good, or maybe if you're doing a group photo to make sure that no one's blinking or stuff like that. And then you have photo modes. This was discussed a little bit last week, where we were talking about the use of the pano mode. That's a mode for making panoramas or wide photos. So if you're taking a picture of a landscape, maybe by the ocean or on top of like a hill or a mountain, you can use the pano mode in order to create a wide photo to get a lot of view in that you might not otherwise be able to get with just a regular photo. And then you have the photo filters. This changes around where it is based on different phones, but this allows you to set different filters on your camera if you so choose. If you do black and white or different color balance changes, you can do that. I never use it, but that's just kind of a fun thing that you can use if you'd like. But also if you accidentally have it set on, then you can go here to turn it off if that's not something you want. And then you have the timer. I'll talk about this in a second, where you can set a self timer if you'd like to put down your phone somewhere to set people up for a group photo, or if you want to set your phone down somewhere to maybe steady it to give it a second to take a picture, you can do that as well. And then for some phones, you have a live photo indicator. This is a system where it takes a little bit of video before and after you're taking a photo, so that when you're going back, you can see the kind of scenery or what was going on around taking the picture, maybe people setting up, or maybe if you're taking a picture of like your dog or something, what your dog was running towards before taking the picture, you can turn that on or off. By default, it's on, and you can see that it's on because the icon is yellow there. And then there's the HDR setting. I'll go over this in a second as well. This allows you to take photographs that have the bright parts of them and the dark parts of them more well exposed, so that you can show off a sunset or maybe an interior view you might have not otherwise been able to do. And then flash setting, I'll again show the different settings on this later as well. If you're indoors, you might want to use this if you don't have enough light to be able to show off what you're taking a picture of, whether it's people or a thing inside, then you can turn on the flash to show that as well. So going on to the flash here. So you see you have options for auto on and off. That shows up when you tap the flash button. If, like yesterday, I was in a museum and you're not allowed to have flash. I wanted to make sure that the flash wouldn't go off. I went into these settings and set it to have it all off so that it would not turn the flash on when I didn't want it to alert people that I was taking a picture. So you can turn that off manually if you want to, or manually turn it on. Auto has it so that if the picture you're about to take is too dark, then it'll automatically turn on the flash and set off the flash when you press the shutter button. Next, you have the HDR mode. Here you can set it so that you can have something that is dark and something is light, both in good exposure at the same time. You'll have the choice here for auto on and off as well. So if you want to automatically decide when to use HDR, you can do that, or you can have it on permanently if you would like as well.
Excuse me, what is HDR?
Yep, go ahead.
What is HDR?
HDR stands for high dynamic range, and it takes three different pictures: a bright picture, a dark picture, and kind of like a regular picture, and then puts them together. So on one picture, maybe in the bright picture, the shadows are in focus and exposure, so that you use that shadow part that was maybe too dark in other pictures, and then maybe in a dark picture that you're taking at the same time, the sky is exposed, right? Then you use that. So you put the two elements together from two different pictures in order to have one picture that has the sky exposed right and the shadow exposed right as well.
Thank you.
And then self timer, as I mentioned before, you have the option for 3 seconds, 10 seconds, or off if you so choose to do that as well. Also, this is a little show of the exposure option that you can have. So if you want to set up your phone so that you expose it manually. So what I mean by this is, in this instance, I made it darker to be able to adjust things manually. So when it's darker, you can see the window in the background you can see out of it, but if it's brighter, you can't really see anything at all, especially the window. You can get this by tapping on the screen to focus. Your camera will focus on the point you tap, and then once you tap to focus, you can pull your finger down on the screen, and that'll get it so that it darkens the exposure, darkens the image, and if you push it up, then it'll lighten the image. So if you're looking at something that is too dark or too light, then you can use this in order to adjust the exposure to get it so it's just perfect. And this is where it's set to be all the way light. It's hard to see anything because it's set way too high, just as the other one, you can't see anything because it's set too low. And you can see that there's still the box showing that where it is focusing, so you can still focus manually if you'd like as well to choose which part of the image you want to focus on. Then also you can zoom in on the screen. This is just a digital zoom. It doesn't change anything with the camera. Some newer phones, you can actually do an optical zoom. So it is using a different lens in order to zoom in to show a more a smaller focal range than you otherwise would, or you can kind of zoom out to have a bigger focal range. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when I go into this in more detail. So if you find yourself not being able to see what you're taking pictures of so well, then you can zoom in a little bit just to get a better view of things, or maybe to help compose an image and like that. This is especially useful for those phones or anyone who has something that they can zoom in on your own and manually, so that you can change around what you're looking at and what your camera sees. So now we're going to go on to depth of focus. This here was a photo I took on top of Cadillac Mountain in Acadia. This was the first point that the sun hits on Christmas Day, and that was the sunrise at that time. So for aperture, that's how you get these out of focus areas in the background. So this picture here I took as a portrait of my partner where the background is blurry and out of focus. Adjusting the aperture or adjusting what kind of lens you have or the zoom you have can help you get that out of focus area behind the subject. Depth of field, what it means is it changes the area in your image that's in focus. So in this case, we have the face clearly in focus and everything beyond the hair. You can even see some of the hairs are starting to go out of focus. So it's changing where in the image it is in focus, and and depth of field affects how much is in focus. And things that are out of focus have that blurry effect there. In order to get it, you also need to have a clear separation and distance between the subject and the background. So in this case, there's probably about 20 to 30 feet between her and the background, the tree behind her. And that was necessary in order to get things out of focus so that it would look nice and not be too distracting. So a bit more specifics about aperture in case you're interested. With a smaller aperture, a larger number, that means that there's less light being brought into the camera and more is going to be in focus. So there's gonna be less blur. So on this picture on the right, you can see that the sign in front of the house is in focus and the house is in focus, and then the tree above the house is all in focus. So this is a small aperture, so less light is being brought into the camera and more things are in focus. So you can see that if this was set up differently, then maybe you wouldn't be able to see the house, you'd only be able to see the sign. So that's what the aperture changes. Some cameras you can adjust the aperture, such as kind of cameras like this that I have that I use. I can adjust the aperture. That's sometimes done on the lens. And then some cameras, some phones now, you can adjust the aperture, so adjusting how much is in focus, the depth of field, but not all of them. You might have to get a special app in order to do that, but it's not something that you can do by default. And then a large aperture, so a smaller number, brings more light into the camera and less is in focus. So there's more blur. So in this picture, less is in focus, so you can't see as much into the background because that's not in focus, but the foreground is in focus. When I'm saying like larger and smaller numbers, this small aperture is usually between like f8, f16, f22, and then the large aperture smaller number is f4, f2.8, f2. These aren't numbers you really need to know or understand. It's just a ratio of the focal length of the lens and the size of the hole that's letting the light in. It's more for people who are really interested in how cameras work, who might want to understand that. All that people mostly need to understand is what effect it has on the pictures that they're trying to take. So going on a little bit more to field of view. This is a picture I took in Connecticut at Crystal Lake. It was, again, sunset. All these are sunset photos. It was a beautiful time just watching the sunset over the lake and watching all of the light play across the water in the dips and waves of what was happening there. So as I was mentioning before, focal range is the zoom. So on this picture on the side, you can see that there's things in front of the camera, out of focus, the trees, and then there's the boat behind it. This wouldn't be the same kind of view you would have if you saw the same thing in person because it's zoomed in. It has a smaller field of view. So in this case, you can zoom in, so going to a higher number, so 80 millimeters, 135 millimeters, etc., to be able to zoom further in onto the image to have a smaller depth of field, or you can zoom out to have more of a wide view of the area. And if you kind of know what a fisheye lens is, that's a field of view that is so wide that it's starting to distort things, so that you're seeing things more like as the name suggests, with a fisheye. So my camera here, I have a lens that has adjustment for the zoom. So there's something here that I can turn in order to zoom in. So some cameras might have this where you can adjust how much you're able to zoom in and out. And that's how you often can do by turning a collar, as they're called, on the lens itself. Or you might have something that has a power zoom where you move a switch and it zooms in and out. So if you need to get closer to your subject, maybe you're taking a picture of someone from far away and you aren't able to get closer, or you want to have a specific look to your image, then you can zoom in order to get a smaller field of view and have a more zoomed in picture. When you're zooming in, as suggested by the picture on the right, you're going to have less things in focus in front of the camera. So this tree was probably maybe 20 feet ahead of me, and it's out of focus. And then the boat that's probably 200 feet in front of me is in focus. So if I took it with a different kind of view, then you would be able to see the whole tree and the boat, but the boat would be further away. And now this is a picture of a wider field of view, so you can see more. So in this instance, you can see all the trees around, and you can see the mountain and the sky. And if you look closer, you can see the moon over one of the far mountains. This is if you're taking a picture of maybe a group of people where you want to get a lot of people in frame at the same time. You might want to have a less zoomed in picture or less wider field of view. Or if you're taking a picture in this instance of a landscape, you can have a wider field of view in order to be able to see more and capture more of the vast landscape that you have in front of you. Or maybe like if you're taking pictures of buildings, then you can use a wider field of view as well to get that in. So when you have more zoomed in, there's going to be a larger separation between the foreground and the background. So there's kind of greater distance as seen in the camera between the foreground and the background. So it's more of a separation. And you also can have the background out of focus more because of that. So if you want to take like a portrait of someone, or you want to take a picture of a flower and you want the background all blurred out, then you can zoom in more or have a smaller field of view in order to take that picture to get the look that you're expecting. And as with a smaller field of view, you don't have to be as close to whatever you're taking a picture of. With a wider field of view, has a smaller separation between foreground and background. So if you're taking a picture of someone, then you're not really likely to have much of a difference between the subject and the background. And this is just some quick examples of different views you might have. So on the right, you have something that's more zoomed out. So that is on my camera, 24 millimeter lens. So you can see more of the greenhouse with that great palm and the ceiling. And then the upper left, you have a picture that is more of a normal look. So if you were there in person, this is more of what you would see. And you're a bit further away from everything, and you can see less in the image, where you can see the same palm, but it's more kind of zoomed in, as you would think. because you can't see the entire stalk of it and you can see the roof. And then you've got something that's zoomed in a lot more, where I have this picture of this fairy where you can't see as much of the surroundings, and everything behind the fairy is all blurry because of the extreme zoom that's on here. All these pictures were taken at Tower Hill Botanical Gardens in West Boylston at actually 3 different times of year. I think top left was early summer, bottom left was late summer, and then the right was taken a couple weeks ago in the winter. So now I'm going to talk about group photos. This picture was taken again in sunset at Cape Ann, specifically near Canoma Point, and one of my favorite places to go. It's very relaxing to sit and watch sunset and the water come in and out and go kayaking there. So lighting for group photos, you should try to keep the camera pointing mostly away from the sun. I say mostly because you also want to make sure you have enough light on whoever you're taking pictures of, but not blind them. In the case of the image below, there was very bright light, so all of us, this is my family by the way, were all blinded by the light, so you can see we're all squinting. To set this photo up, I tried to angle ourselves a little bit away from the sun, so we're not directly facing the sun, but facing it at an angle, so it wasn't going directly into our eyes, but off to the side a little bit. But then you have some harsh lines, so you have shadows under the eyes because of how our eyebrows are created. So that makes it so it's not as good of a photo, but it still gets across what we're trying to show and document the moment. What I try to do is, if I'm able to take a picture with a little bit under the shadow or some of the sun blocked off, or maybe if it's cloudy, that's always going to come out better because there you won't blind everyone. But just make sure you're not having people facing towards the sun, but also make sure you're not facing the camera towards the sun, because then you won't be able to see anything but silhouettes of the people you're trying to take a picture of. For composing, generally for portraits or group photos, you should have the picture centered on the face for one person and centered vertically for multiple people. So in this instance, the pictures are centered about vertically, so the faces are in the center of the photo, and it's almost centered horizontally as well, but it's mostly centered, so right between them is at the center of the image, so that it's not just one of them or the other them, but the center of them themselves. With candidates, you can have a little bit more stretch, so just take whatever you're doing. You don't have to have people in the center, but for general, you should keep people away from the edges. So like if you're trying to take a picture of someone, try to make sure that they're not being cut off, maybe if like their face isn't getting cut off at all, or that everyone is within the frame at the same time, so that you can show all of someone, not just part of someone. Of course, that's hard to get if you're taking pictures of a busy scene with people moving around and a lot happening. As for the background, this can affect just all photos, but specifically group photos. You should make sure you're avoiding distracting backgrounds, such as people in the background, maybe making weird faces or looking at the camera when you don't want to take a picture of them. Any sort of lines, any sort of similar colors. In this picture on the right, while it's not of a person, it's of a clay snowman, the color of the clay is kind of the same as the color of the clay in the background, so it's kind of distracting to not know where the foreground and the background is because the colors are all too similar. To make this a better picture, I would probably try to move the view around so that maybe it was the snowman, maybe the snowman would be seen against a different backgrounds so that it's not a dark on dark, or so it's not similar textures in the background, or go further away so that the background is more blurred out, for some examples. What I like to do for backgrounds, especially for group photos, is to show the scenery. I'll show an example in a little bit about that. So maybe not specifically have the picture centered on the group, but maybe offset a little bit so you can see what it is there in front of, maybe the ocean or maybe a mountain or something like that. So for candidates, for setting up shots, I often step away from what's happening just a little bit so I can be able to move around and take a picture of what I want to take a picture of without being just right in the middle, and then you're trying to spin around and figure out what's going on. Also, just in general, watch what people are doing, see if people are doing anything interesting, or expect moments to happen. Maybe you see something off to the side, then look at the people and see what their reactions are to them. And then maybe if someone looks really happy or someone's doing something fun, then you can just say like, hey, look over here for a second. And when they look, you can take a picture of them, and that'll be a good picture, instead of having them maybe stop what they're doing and pose or something. You can just break the action for a second to take a picture. So in this instance, I think we were looking up at snow falling off of a tree. So I saw that there was like the sun coming through the tree and snow falling down. So I pointed my camera at my sister and my father here and took a couple pictures to show them looking up in awe at the picture. I could have just easily kind of noticed something that I was interested in them looking at, and maybe said like, hey, can you like look up at that tree for a second and look like you're in awe, and get the same kind of thing. And as long as people are actually in awe about something, or good actors, then you should be able to get a good picture of that in this instance, where you've got a nice picture to document the day there. And then this is another one where it's not people looking at the camera. I didn't stop any action. It was just my friends here walking around, and I just took a picture to show what they were doing. So just kind of looking at things and not really talking. And in this instance, none of them are really focused and in the center. So my friend in the yellow jacket is mostly in the center, but they're not in focus. And the person in the green jacket on the right is in focus, but isn't in the center. So it kind of makes an interesting photo, because it shows what's going on, but doesn't quite have the elements that you'd expect from a photo that's just trying to document it. In this instance, if you want to take a photo where things aren't in the center, usually phones or cameras default to having the camera focus right on the center. So here I found what I wanted to focus on, in this case, my friend's face, and focused on that. On a phone, you can tap on where you want to focus and it'll focus there. And on a camera like the one I have, I was able to point my camera so the center was on their face, and then do a little half press of the shutter, which focuses the camera, doesn't take a picture, and then move back to where the center is. So in this case, I focused over on their face and then moved to where I wanted the center of the photo to be, and it stayed focused on their face so that I could have an alternate point of focus. It basically just means that there's ways you can have pictures where you're not focusing right on the center, to make it a little bit more interesting and kind of show off things that you might not be able to show off otherwise if you're just focused on the center, as what sometimes cameras do and is easy to do. And then here's another candid I took. So I didn't ask them to pose for this. I just turned around and took a picture. I was probably saying something and we're having conversation. So they were laughing about something. And maybe when I turned my camera towards them, they paused for a second to make sure I was able to get a good picture. Although this is something that they are generally in the center of the frame, but as with some of the other photos, their face is not right in the vertical center of the picture. I gave more space so that you can see more of them rather than more of the tree above them or the sky above them. So this is just an example of that there. So alternative composing. So when you're taking a group picture, maybe if you're taking a family photo or a photo of friends, you want to make sure you can see everyone's face. That's often done by putting people in two different lines and giving everyone a hole. So a hole is just an area between one person's head and another person's head where someone else can look through. That's done often by just having everyone offset so that there is a view line through so everyone can see the camera. Just asking people if they can see the camera before taking the picture is usually good to make sure it's set up correctly. But then also just making sure everyone is staying still and isn't blinking. You might have to take a bunch of pictures at the same time to make sure that you're able to get one where someone isn't blinking or looking away or something isn't happening that you don't want to happen. So in this instance here, you've got what I was talking about where everyone's offset. So it's not aligned directly so everyone has a hole or place to look. But here you have one person looking off to the side, so not looking at the camera. Here, you have someone looking at the camera, but then everyone else is looking at the camera. And then here you've got someone blinking, so that's not another photo. Someone looking off the side, and then someone making an interesting face. So while those two weren't great photos, as you go further on, you get maybe a better photo that will actually have people looking in the right way and not blinking. With this group of photos, I wasn't able to get one where everyone was looking at the camera, not blinking. So I had to edit them together so that people's faces were on not blinking in photos that everyone else were not blinking. So I was able to fix something that might have not otherwise been fixed and might have had a picture where someone was looking away. But in general, take a bunch of pictures to make sure you're able to get at least one that someone's not blinking so that you can have a whole picture where everyone looks good. So here was what I was talking about with a group photo where you're showing off the scenery. So here we're not centered in the middle. We're not right in the center of the frame. As I was talking about before, we're not taking up the entire picture, but you can see the mountain in the background to show the scenery of where you are. So you don't have to just see people's faces in a group photo, but you can also set up so you can see what's in the background, see trees, see a mountain, see clouds, or if you're on a beach or in like maybe someone's house, maybe you're taking a Christmas photo, you can have that as well so that you can make sure you understand why you're taking the picture rather than just to show the people. And then, of course, there's selfies or self-portraits. My family does this a lot to have a quick picture to take when we're on a hike or when we're going somewhere. You can capture yourself in the setting without having the need to set up a tripod or set up your phone somewhere so that you can have everyone in the photo, including you, but can be a really quick picture you can take of yourself and a group or yourself or just the group itself. This is another example of it that I took of me and my friends going out for a walk where you can have yourself in the picture and then anyone else in the background as well joining the picture rather than just having a picture of other people it's often the only time I'm in pictures because I'm the only one who takes pictures of my friends and family, but that's okay with me. Okay, so that's what I have for my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions or talk about other things. But for the next session, I would like to talk about other people's photos and see what people are able to do, either inspired or from things you're learning from this week's or last week's session, or anything that you've done in the past or anything you want to talk about. You can send your photos to my email here, so dcalder13@icloud.com. You can also send me other things of final topics you want me to talk about, or photographers you like, or photos you like, or anything else you'd like to see more of. And I'd be happy to work on that to put more things onto next week's slides so that we can talk about what you want to get out of these sessions.